first step is telling the story of the shame. And of course, everybody in this room knows, right, that we're touching a fragrance of this. So I just really want to say that. So for those of you who are, I mean, there's so many wonderful teachers and brilliant facilitators and, brilliant, gorgeous beings in the room, right? If you think we could do this more slowly, and of course we could, that's absolutely, you're all completely right. We're doing an archetypal process to evolve the source code, right? And we're standing in, right, in the universal love story to actually begin to open the space for the healing and transformation of shame by opening up the source code itself. And clearly, in terms of each of our individual processes, it's not going to be a complete moment. So I want to just say that clearly. Okay, so that's absolutely true. So that internal critic's voice is, of course, right. Of course, that's right. That's a given, right? Fair? Fair? Okay, that's good, everyone? Okay, fair, that's good. And we're gonna. This needs to be greatly expanded, this is not the week or the day for it. What I want to do is I want to walk the path with you once. When there's a labyrinth, so one of the first practices of a labyrinth is we walk it once together. Okay, that's the practice we're doing today. We're walking the labyrinth once together. Okay, fair? Okay? Okay. So now, we did step one, or phase one, which was recognition. We realized that we even had a shameplex, right? We named the shameplex. We have a shame print in the shameplex, and we just started to notice. It's this first phase of awareness. Then we stepped into engagement. We defined shame, and our first definition of shame was what? Not, I did something bad or I did something wrong, but I am wrong. Can't be fixed. We went through the 4 double binds. It's kind of amazing that we've done all this already. We've done through 4 double binds, right? There's an original double bind, right? The word in Flemish for recapitulate, right? So the next set of double binds all recapitulate the original double bind. When someone wants to translate the word recapitulate, you get what I mean by that? Meaning there's an original double bind, I live, I die, right? My goodness and my aliveness are inseparable. My aliveness has been rejected, but that's my aliveness. It's been rejected by that which is the source of my life. So if I live, I'm in my aliveness, which is also my goodness, then I die. If I live, I die. That's the original double bind. And then in the personal double binds, it's recapitulated. Right? So just show of hands. Everyone get what we mean by recapitulated? Good, okay? And then it's recapitulated again in the 4 cultural double binds. And we just looked at the meta double binds as a kind of overarching, okay. So now we're going to switch to, right? Remember, shame is, here's the sentence, and this is Lori Galpern's sentence, right? And she said it to KK and I late one night, and it was a beautiful sentence. Just shame is multi-layered and insidious. Insidious means clever. Fool is you. Got you. Ah! Got it? Okay. So, right? Shame is multi-leveled. That was a little scary. Okay, shame is, right multi-leveled, right, multi-layered and insidious. And the reason, Lori said that was because we were trying for years, I was trying many different approaches to shame. And then KK was in her own practice of the body prying approaches to shame. Then we brought some of them together, and it's been 20 years looking for approaches to shame. And every time I thought I cut off the head of shame, there it was, the hydra someplace else. Right? And so Lori pointed out, right, Clint, shame is multi-layered and insidious. It's a beautiful sentence. It's simple. It's elegant. Right? And we realized, oh, there's this other thing. I saw, oh, shame's also doing something else. So we created what's called the psychological interview. And the psychological interview, which I'm going to tell you about, we're not going to do. We're going to do the second one. It's called the Tantric interview. But there's a different face to shame. Now, do you remember our principle of non-rejection? Meaning nothing's off the table. Remember our 4 principles? And reality is a trickster? So don't you kind of feel like we shamed shame? Don't you feel we kind of shamed shame a little bit here? Feel a little bad about that? We're kind of shaming shame. So maybe we need to actually, principle of non-rejection, reality is a trickster. Oops. Right? Whoop. Right? Maybe we need to give shame the microphone. Maybe shame has something to say that we actually weren't hearing completely. Okay? And when we give shame the microphone at the second level of engagement in phase 2, right? Phase 1, noticing, phase 2, engagement. Now, this is a second level of engagement at phase 2. We do what's called the psychological interview. And in the psychological interview, we give shame the microphone. We actually speak to shame, right? And it turns out that shame, right, always has, right, something to say, right? And as you think that you've got it all worked out, and that shame is kind of, horrific and terrible, and shame gets a little offended because, right, shame actually has something that shame is interested in saying. And I'm not going to read you. I was thinking I was about to, and I realized it's going to take 15 minutes to do, so I'm not going to do it. But I'll give you just a sense, right, of what an interview looks like. Okay? So imagine that your name is Vera, and we spoke to Vera at great length. And Vera has this experience, and she wrote us about this story. She wrote me about this story, right? She wrote an incredible letter where she talked about her early experience of self-pleasuring, right? And her mother's shaming of that experience. So that looks like a classical engagement 1, tell the story of the shame process. But that didn't seem to be quite right. So we decided to give shame the microphone. And we actually did a process where we actually said, shame, okay, we really love our friend Vera here, who's been working with us for a long time. And we wonder, you can't be all that bad. And, there's a principle of non-rejection, and we don't want to shame you. So I guess let's give you the microphone. And shame said, and we actually did a psychodramatic process, said, oh, thank you so much, right? Right? Everyone's just shaming me all the time, right? And I'm totally rejected, and no one ever lets me talk. And it was like, wow, right? There was like this new air in the room, right? And so we said to shame, well, okay. I mean, we didn't have much confidence that shame would have anything to say, to be perfectly honest with you, right? But we wanted to at least go through the motions. And shame said to us, just listen carefully. Remember Jason, whose mother forgot to bring him on the plane? Shame said, if you actually knew Vera's mom, right? Vera's mom always used to come late to pick her up from school. And sometimes she would just forget and not pick her up at all. And Vera would be left standing there when all the kids at her private school had gotten picked up. And kid by kid by kid would get picked up. And at least 2-3 times a month, she'd be standing there by herself, waiting for her mother, who never came. And the unbearable truth was, and I knew this because I was there, is her mother didn't love her. It's an unbearable truth. Have you ever listened to a lullaby? In 2005, I did a 3-month, almost insane dive into reading lullabies from all over the world. That's all I did, 3 months. I read lullabies. Because I was shocked that all lullabies, in every fucking language in the world, are about horrific violence imposed by the mother on the baby. Rock-a-bye baby on the treetop, right? When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. And then what happens? And down will come baby, splattered skull to death on the ground. Baby and all. Every single language in the world has lullabies sung by mothers in these beautiful voices that are about ripping the fucking baby apart and killing the baby. And I was like, I remember I read the first one. I said, I started with Rockabye Baby. I said, this is weird. Why is nobody noticing this? Why like rock? Let's do it together. Ready? Rockabye, right? It's creepy. Don't do it. Okay, right? Right? I was like, whoa. And then I went to German, and then I went to Norse versions, and I went to Chinese versions. Japanese. They're all the same. And I was going to stop and write a book on it. And then 2006 got complicated. So I never got there, right? But it's like, wow. So what the fuck is that about? Okay, so here's the truth you're not allowed to speak. It's not easy being a mother. All your energy gets completely absorbed by that little cunt kid. You had a big life. You were sexy. You were excited. You were alive. You had dreams. And now all you do, literally, is run around as a servant, right, to this tyrannical being, right, who demands every second of your time, right, cruelly. It's been 9 months, right, since the birth. My husband hasn't touched me. My lover, my friend, my woman partner, whoever it is, hasn't touched me since then. We're finally going to get together. Oh, my God, I've been waiting for this all day. We're just dropping our clothes. Ah! Now, exponentialize that. That creates lullabies. It's clear. Wow. But here's the thing. The most integrated, balanced, whole, and enlightened people, how many people are on that list? Figure that one out yourself, right? Manage to walk through it. But there's an entire fucking subsection of the population, including Meryl Streep, Jenny Orlean, right, on that movie we just saw, who simply don't love their children. Simple and straight, and no one will say it out loud. So shame acts as a protective mechanism. And what literally shame said when we gave her the microphone, she said, I wanted to protect Vera because I knew that the unbearable pain of knowing that her mother didn't love her would have ripped her to pieces. There's no possible way she could have held it. So I focused her. I was a decoy. I focused her energy on sexual shame and her mother shaming herself, pleasuring, and that got her completely absorbed, and she made it through her whole childhood, right, and into adulthood without ever realizing that horrible truth. Wow. So we then said to shame, we said, tears in our eyes. All of us together, we said, thank you. And Vera turned to shame that had the microphone and said, thank you. Like, thank you. And then we said to shame, and do you love Vera? And shame said, I totally love Vera. So we asked shame, would you now be willing to let go? Would you be willing to let go? Would you be willing to let go of your grip on Vera? She's now an adult. She's powerful. She can hold it. She doesn't need that sexual shame anymore. And shame said, I'll try. It's a big habit I have. It's not easy, but I'll try. And shame tried. And shame gradually let go. And it's not that shame disappears. It's not quite how it works, but it moves from the foreground to the background, right? It no longer has the steering wheel. Okay, so that's the psychological interview of shame. And I'm going to add one more piece to it. And in the second level of engaging shame, in the second level, we give shame the microphone. So shame's also told us something else. Multiple times. Right? And I'm working with, KK and I are working with Lori, right? And this appears in the incredible work of Claire and Unique Self Institute, which we'll be talking about later in the week in Unique Self Coaching. With Lori working on a book called Unique Self Recovery, which really is Lori's real baby, where she's taking all of her clinical work and merging it with this shame work. And here's one of the things that we noticed. And I noticed it time and again, and KK noticed it, and Lori noticed it, and Lori's running usually, 30 people in a group and a new group every 3 weeks. So we've really, over the last decade, really looked at this really carefully. So there's another thing that shame does when you give shame the microphone that shame tells you. Shame, this time shame's not being protective, but shame's actually acting as a false flag, and particularly sexual shame. Sexual shame acts as a false flag in the best sense to distract attention from what will destroy you. That was our first story of Vera. But there's two other senses. I'll give you the easy one because it's not as immediate and personal, though it's a very big deal, and I'll get to the harder one. The immediate one is, and we could talk about this for 4 hours, I'll just throw it out as a sentence. Sexual shame in culture is used to deflect from the actual meta-crisis of culture. So if you notice, we're facing existential risk and catastrophic risk, and we're in the middle of insane woke arguments, right, about this or that detail. So there's this obsessive new Puritanism, and that new Puritanism finds a bunch of people to crucify across the board. We focus on that crucifixion. It distracts our attention from what's actually happening at the core of culture. So if you use that hermeneutic prism, you'll actually understand an enormous amount of what happens where there's, right, the focus we give to sexual scandal, for example, right, completely dwarfs, right, the enormous galactic challenges of suffering, right, that engage us. And it's used and deployed intentionally on all sides of the aisle. So sexual shame in culture, when you give it the microphone, it tells you it's being deployed as a decoy. But let's make it more personal, because we're going personal today. In our own lives, and this is the psychological interview, right, we often use sexual shame to avoid the deeper shame of not living our lives, of not living my unique self, right, of not giving my gift. So I actually focus my energy on the early shame, right? You get how, this is the Tantric move. Reality's a trickster. We just did a big shift. We just did a trickster move. There's a reality as a trickster. We just went into the principle of non-rejection. First, we traced shame back to the root, and we just did a complete 360-degree trickster turn, right? And we can work it out over time. We don't have to work it out now, but just feel that voice where I use my engagement with my own shame and sexual shame as actually a false flag to allow me to avoid actually giving my gift, living my unique self. And so I'm in this endless process of processing, right, my own early events, and I die doing that process. So wow, that's psychological interview. Cha. That's big. So we could spend the whole afternoon on this, right? Does everyone get that? We could spend the entire afternoon on this, the entire day, the entire week. Okay? So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is just get up, just shake it out, and sit back down because we're going to go on. Just get up for a second, just shake it out. Just shake it out. We're just going to shake it out. I'm going to shake it out, 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 shake it out. Okay? Okay. Yeah, shake it out. Shake it out, shake it out, shake it out. And we're not going to go longer than we did yesterday. Okay, so shake it out. Okay? Shake it out, 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 shake it out. Oh. Shake it out. There's a lot in here. Okay, don't leave this inside. Shake it out. 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 Right? We're about 10 minutes away from where we want to be, and then we're going to go completely wild. Okay? So grab a seat if you can. You ready? We got a drum roll in the room. We're doing this for culture. We're participating in the evolution of the source code. Okay. But if you really get, and join us, friends, and now it gets one big stage of wild now, but then it just goes ballistic. So everything we've done this morning is we're just a prelude. Okay, now we're about to get there. Okay, we're gonna do 10 minutes now, and then we're going wild. We're going like all the way, and the whole thing just goes crazy. Okay, so just stay close. We're still loving the hat. Okay, we're good. Okay, so great to see you, Benjamin. Okay, so now there's a third level of engagement. First level of engagement, telling the story of the shame. Huge level of engagement. If you want to do some tracing, who's heard of Brené Brown? Pretty famous figure. This is a room that's probably heard of her. Brené focuses all of her work, I would say, on the first level, on telling the story of the shame. And she does good work. I've never read her. I've read little pieces of her articles, but you get quickly what she's doing. Right? She's doing that level, which is great. Great job, great contribution. But it doesn't take you home. It's a very important step. Telling the story of the shame. Contact, heal, shame. That's just, then you go to the psychological interview. That's the second level of engagement. Okay? And there's two parts to the psychological interview that we just talked about, right? Fair? Good? Now we go to the next step. That's level engagement to now the third level of engagement. Okay, and we're trying to heal the source code of culture here, okay? We're trying to go into the very source code of culture, right, and cut to its heart, right, and begin to open up a space. So here we go. So there's a second interview, and this is the third level of engagement, which we want to call, right, KK and I call the Tantric interview. What's the Tantric interview? So remember, the Tantric interview is fantastic. Tantra, principle of non-rejection, reality is a trickster. So have you ever heard that phrase, right? And I don't know what the Flemish version or the Dutch version or the German version is or the French version, right? But there's a phrase that exists in one way or another in every culture, which is, you should be ashamed of yourself. Right? We all know that phrase. You can translate it in any language, right? It's a universal phrase. You should be ashamed of yourself, right? Now, there's one voice of you should be ashamed of yourself, which actually can be shaming. But there's another voice that's actually quite beautiful, which is, if you reread it, it's, you should be ashamed of yourself because you're just not that kind of person. Because it actually violates something of the full dignity, nobility, and honor of who you are. You're not an ordinary peasant. You're royalty. You're a king. You're a queen. And kings and queens hold themselves in a particular way. So actually, if you would liberate the spark, if I can borrow a 16th century phrase, right? If I would liberate the spark from the husk, H-U-S-K, from the outer shell, right, of that phrase, you should be ashamed of yourself, there's actually something very beautiful, which is you should be ashamed of yourself. And there's actually a hidden whisper, right? If the first level of engagement is, you say to shame, where did we first meet? Right? The second level of engagement is, how are you protecting me? Right? Or what are you hiding from me? Or how are you, right? The third level of engagement is, I have a secret to tell you. And what's the secret? You're a fucking king and queen. You're actually gorgeous. You're actually beautiful. And because you are so gorgeous, and because you're so beautiful, there's actually a place in which, actually, if you're doing that, you should be ashamed of yourself. Not because you're bad, because you're ashamed of yourself. Because you're gorgeous. Because you're royalty. Because you're wonder. Because you're beauty. And there's a dimension of shame which we have to recover. Right? And there's a dimension in contemporary culture in which shame got lost. So that's where we cringe at Jason Orlean, who's given by his mother, and notice the whole week, right, it's one fabric. He's given by his mother the microphone to say a prayer, and he does a prayer for stuff. Remember that? You're like, fuck. Right? Right? In other words, and he has no shame. And he's the inverse. He literally has no shame. He represents that figure, and actually, if you look at the contemporary literature, right, in the millennial generation, right, that which has gone down in all the indexes cross-culturally is any experience of shame. Not because it's been liberated and transmuted and transformed, to be clear, but because there's a different quality of shame, which is actually whispering in your ear, you're a rock star. You're a king. You're a queen. You're beauty itself. So actually hold yourself like a prince. Now, that's not about sexual shame, right? Right? What that voice does is it confuses, it gets confused with the other voices. So you actually have to go through the first level, recover, tell the story of your shame, step out of, right, the sexual shame, which is festering in the dark. You have to actually realize where are the places you're using shame, or what's shame protecting you. But there's other voices of shame, which are about something else. And those other voices of shame are not about sexual shame. They're not about the rejection of your aliveness. They're not about if I live, I die. They're actually an invitation to live. There's actually a voice of shame that needs to have a place at the table. And it's not toxic shame, right? But it's actually, right, it's a powerful, potent expression, right, of the actual ability to know my own nobility. And if I know my own nobility, I can be disappointed with myself. But that shame doesn't tell me I'm bad. You get what I'm saying? It's the exact opposite of shame level 1, if you will. It's not, this shame doesn't say I'm bad. This shame says you're fucking awesome. You're a king. You're a queen. So that shame is a function of what we call here in this room confessing your greatness. Right? When you confess your greatness, if you genuinely are willing to engage in a confession of greatness, and I can remember when a group of us, there's actually 2 of us in the room who were there at that moment, right, at a particular place, right, you know, somewhere in Provence, near Provence. I remember when we confessed our greatness. And I can remember literally that moment. We went around the room and 6 or 7 of us, right, confessed our greatness. And I remember the hesitancy in the room. Whoa, what's that? Right, what's that? Right? And James created the context for that moment. Right? Right? And it was an incredible moment. And we went around the room and confessed, right, our greatness. And it was such a strange thing to do. And then the confessions were stunning. Were stunning. Because we're so trained to this kind of knee-jerk humility, which is anything but humble, which doesn't own our grandeur. And I've got to own not my grandiosity. You get that word? That's a clinical word. But my grandeur. So the Tantric interview is when I actually allow a different quality of shame. So just notice that these 3 levels of engagement are identifying 3 distinct qualities of shame that are all called shame. So the first quality of shame is if I live, I die. Double bind. And it goes through 4 or 5 double binds in culture. And total love to you, Benet. I think we've evolved your work kind of dramatically. You kind of focus in a very narrow area. So these 5 double binds would help. So feel free to borrow them, right? But that's the first level of shame. Second level of shame, psychological interview. In the three ways we talked about it. Third level of shame, interview shame, but a tantric interview. This time, give shame the microphone, but it's a different shame. We're just using the same word. It's a completely different, sorry for the fancy word, but phenomenological quality. It's a different quality of consciousness each time. It's different shame. They're all called shame. They all need to be engaged. And you can only engage them by first doing engagement 1, tell the story of your shame. Then do the psychological interview, right? And then do the tantric interview. Okay, ready? Now who's ready to take off now? Now we have ground for takeoff. That's all we have now. We now have ground for takeoff. Now that's a shocking thing to say. That's a shocking thing to say. We're not going to spend all the time we should on this. We're going to spend a short time on it. But now we have ground for takeoff. So here's the thing. Okay, now if we can just stay hearts close to each other, here's the crazy thing.